at stations, and still going today. So historically, it's been largely with agricultural interests in mind in the southern and western parts of the state. There are some urban stations in the Phoenix area that are working with the city of Phoenix there to help with some of the ET numbers. And of course, that's relating to their irrigation usage in city parks and golf courses there. At present, we have about 27 stations. We measure air and soil temperatures, precipitation, relative humidity, solar radiation, and wind. Right now, a big part of what I'm helping the network to do is to continue with and hopefully wrap up, hit some milestones as far as the modernization of things go for ASMET, particularly in how the data are stored, as well as access to the data sets. Once that hurdle is crossed, some of the things we'll be looking to do are, think about some of the existing information products that we do have and make sure those are continuing to move forward, be provided, but also think about some new analytical or information products that we can develop based on the data of the network. Whether that's for, again, traditionally, the sectors that we've worked with, largely in agriculture, but also looking to new areas, different aspects of agriculture. A lot of what we've been doing so far has been annual crops or with pecans and orchards. There is one station with the wine grape growers here in the state, but they have 3 main growing areas in the state. And so we're missing 2 spots there potentially that the industry has told me already could be of interest to them. Other areas of interest might be, as far as any type of new applications go with energy demand and some of the utilities, that sector. Water management is, of course, something that's really big here in the West, as we all know. Our stations along the Colorado River are helping with the Bureau of Reclamation and their estimates of water usage along the river there. So we're looking to continue that and expand on that potentially as well. So I didn't hear any ducks yet, so I think I'm in the good, and I'll stop there.
Wow, yeah, you have about a minute left. Any quick questions for Jeremy, since we have a little bit of time before we move on?
Just making sure the group you said was ASMET.
Yes, AZMET. That's our shorthand for the Arizona Meteorological Network.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
You bet.
So Jeremy, is there a place to get like past data? Is there archives and I guess the quality? Because I think there was some stations are on pretty close to our New Mexico border, right? That I was thinking about. I saw a paper written on it, so I was like, oh, I wonder how I had to get some of that data to look at.
Yeah, it is available online right now under the current system. They're annual based text files, whether for hourly or daily data. Dave, you reminded me real quick as a bit of a tangent here. The QA/QC part, that's something as well we're trying to modernize and automate as much as possible. Back to the main topic though, the stations along Arizona, New Mexico border, San Simon, as well as Bowie, those would probably be your 2 closest ones. And then we also have some, there are 2, one north, one south of the Wilcox area right now.
Awesome. So are these 3-meter stations or what?
2 meter, yes.
2,
that's right.
Like 2-meter temperature.
Yeah, I'll have to confirm that. Yeah, I'm new, still getting these numbers.
Oh, that's great. That's great. We should collaborate because I'll talk about what we're doing in New Mexico, and then maybe there's some things that we can learn from each other.
Sounds great. I'm sure there are, especially from my perspective, learning from you.
Awesome. So Jeremy, if you happen to have links to those data, if you could drop them in the chat, that would be great. And perfect configuration. Dave, you are next on my screen. So I was going to call on you next. Yeah, and then after Dave, it'll be Russ.
I've got a couple slides to share. So if you're not familiar with the New Mexico network, this is the layout. The reds are the New Mexico network, and the black and the blue, I mean the white and the blue are the National Weather Service. So there's a big gaps. Just a picture of one of the sites. The nice thing about we've 7 of them are co-located with the co-ops. So we've got good records to compare, and a bunch of them are at ag science centers. And Ken Kunkel, I'm just working on I'm actually working on another website, but I was documenting some of the history, and Ken Kunkel, I talked to him, and he was the one who set up a lot of these back in 1983. So some good history. So what the topic of what I want to bring up is the expansion. So we've been working with a lot of folks over the past 3 years, and we really want to expand it to about 3 to 5 stations per county. We got 33 counties. So that if you do a GIS analysis, that's about a station every 760 square miles, which seems like a lot, big area, but it's a big state. So we've got money to expand partially in the eastern side. So we decided just because of the funds and the way we're setting things up and the needs of the folks is there are 3 different tiers. And so to incorporate existing networks that we have. So like the tier 1 is sort of like the standard Mesonet 10-meter tower, sensors across 10 and 2 meter. And then a tier 2 is kind of our standard, what we have already. And then tier 3 are some of basically just measuring temperature and precip. So low cost to cut down, but have more stations. So we're working on the funding. That's kind of the biggest thing, is we can't expand without money. We've just been doing grants and contracts, which kind of struggle. In some years you get a bunch, and then some years you get nothing. So we've been working with the state legislature over the past 3 years, and we've gotten a good kind of a snowball going, and it's rolling down the hill. We're not sure what kind of rocks it'll encounter, but we're sort of learning the ropes, and we got about 900K to start, and then getting some sustainable money on a regular basis, kind of through our ag experiment station. That's kind of how we're working on it with state legislators, and so that's kind of our. And I'll be talking about this, and that's another topic of this is the National Mesonet, and the AESC is they've been putting together a Mesonet committee, and then a monthly or so webinars. And that's another thing I wanted to bring up, that maybe link this with that, is kind of lessons learned, and old networks. People who have a lot of experience can help those who are like us with, developing new networks and expanding things like that, and what sensors work, and kind of the lessons learned. I know I learned a lot from Jama, who's on the call this afternoon, and kind of how we can develop partnerships, and how do you do things now, the way funding is. So that's basically all I have. Was mainly to let people know, and collaboration, and we're always looking for new partners, and we've got Bureau of Reclamation has been one through the WERA102 funding, and so maybe there's other ways to kind of help each other and collaborate on maybe regional efforts. That we all have borders, and we could easily use that kind of that help, even if it's just support. Looking at New Mexico and Colorado, we have stations really close to the border, and how can we leverage the Colorado when we're learning something about the mountains in northern New Mexico. So I will stop there, and probably less than 5 minutes as well.
Yeah, you had, we have about 30 seconds left. Does anybody have a brief question for Dave about this expansion in New Mexico? Okay, so we'll move on to Colorado, and Russ Schumacher, you're next on my screen.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I think I know pretty much everybody here, but I'm Russ Schumacher from Colorado Climate Center. So yeah, here I think similar to a lot of you, there's been the big swings between the drought and improvements in drought over the last year. We had our worst wildfire season on record last year, but then this year has been not so bad. So kind of balancing some of that. And Emily, I'm glad you brought up the topic of the kind of special data that gets collected after the wildfires, because there's a lot of that happening in Colorado too. And some of it is in sort of normal places where you would expect it to be, but I think there's probably a lot of other stuff that that people are collecting that it would be good to make sure it gets sort of saved for different uses and for the longer term. But yeah, on the topics of this meeting, so our Ag Weather Network, CoAgMet, which we also are branding as Colorado's Mesonet, that's actually become a sort of bigger fraction of what we do in our office over time, or a bigger proportion of our funding. So we've done a lot of new things in the last year with new, web charts and graphs and maps on the web, and an API and easier ways to access the data. So that's kind of been a big part of what we've been working on there. And some of that's related to a new partnership with the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, or Northern Water, which also has a network of weather stations in northeastern Colorado. And so their QA/QC person retired, and so they contracted with us basically to do their QA/QC, and now we're also disseminating their data kind of along with ours. So it added a dozen or so stations to our network, sort of without having to do a whole lot of work on our end, other than the same kinds of QA/QC we'd be doing anyway. So we've had, we have the kind of good funding now from the National Mesonet program, and we've been able to continue getting some state funds for the network. And similar to Dave, we're not going to the legislator to ask for lots of money for expansion, but we really need money for O&M. And so that's kind of where, and we were making some progress on that prior to COVID, but now we need to revisit some of that going forward. We have a couple of other, newish projects that relate to CoAgMet. One, the Colorado Department of Agriculture is going to pay for soil moisture sensors at more stations, and through some stimulus funds that they got. And then the Colorado Wine Industry Development Board, we've been working with them for a number of years, but we've always done like 1-year projects, like let's put in some cheap thermometers here to see how cold it gets at night. And we've been trying to say, well, it'd be better to just monitor this long term, not just like 1 year at a time. So we're hoping that'll go forward as well. And then I guess one other thing to note that kind of relates to some of the agricultural piece, Peter Goebel in our office has a paper that hopefully should be accepted soon, where he developed a crop specific version of the SPEI that has some interesting potential usefulness and some interesting results there. So I'll stop. I don't know how much time I used, but
You guys are pretty consistent. You have a minute left. So does anybody have any questions for Russ? I thought the operations and maintenance money question is what I've been thinking about as we add more stations.
Yeah, that's where the National Mesonet program definitely kind of comes in very beneficial, because that's sort of okay to use that money for that. Whereas the funding source we've had with the state was really designed for when the network expanded. So it went from, along with funding from the Bureau of Reclamation, so this network, and this was kind of before I came on, but the network went from 40, 50 stations to the 90 that we have now over 5 years ago or so. And we don't really want to expand the network a lot. There are some targeted spots where we want more stations, but we're pretty happy with how big the network is now. But then it's a lot easier to ask for money to build new stations and expand the network. Sort of harder to convince people then that they have to pay for the people going out there and making sure the data is good all the time, which is also needed, as I'm sure you all are quite familiar with.
So I have a question, Russ. What how are the regional CRNs doing in Colorado? I know we've struggled a lot, and we're kind of retooling those. What's your experience?
Yeah, so the fact that you mentioned that made me think I was gonna reach out to you offline, so we don't need to take up too much of that. Basically, we're still in the issue where we don't have a great method for getting that data in a timely manner. We have some people we can get it for us, and so we get it eventually, but it'd be nice to get it in real time or near real time, and we don't really know how to do that. So if you know how to do it, then we'll talk to you.
Yeah, let's talk offline on that. I've pulled in Greg McCurdy, and we've got some ideas, but it still involves them as the in between.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, because and part of what we have been outfitting some of those stations with additional sensors. So that has been, we're very interested in keeping those going, but also having it be more of a real-time part of the network. So good, we'll chat more about that on email or something.
Yeah, that'd be great. And in Arizona as well, I think that there's some collaboration would be good.
Great. I noticed that Michael Anderson, you came off mute and turned your video on. Did you have a question for Russ?
Oh, I was just going to ask Russ if one of the ways we found that got a lot more attention for some of our remote stations was when turns out they're tied to key water management decisions, and an avalanche is kind enough to take one out to provide a great object lesson as to the need for those maintenance funds. Don't know if that would help you in seeking that, but
you mean to have one of our stations get plowed over by an avalanche?
well, just one that, maybe Denver Water or one of your more influential partners really counts on. That's in the absence of them just advocating for you and saying, hey, these are really important to us to be able to keep on doing what we do.
Yeah, and we definitely have those partners that'll go to bat for us. It's, as much as anything, it's finding the funding mechanism that sort of everyone can agree on is the right place to pull it. But we did, funny story, we did lose 2 stations in the last year. One, some people were using it for target practice and shot it up, but eventually, like, our extension partners fortunately were able to kind of work that out, and they paid for it. Like, they paid for the repair of the station. And then the other one was a ag burning that got out of control and burned up the station, and that one still, we need to figure out what to do about that, because we don't think we're going to get reimbursed for that one.
So I'm not sure if this is going to affect the state levels, but NOAA just put out a information call for, they call them Institute weather station or data monitoring systems that are underfunded. And so they're trying to, I think, go to Congress and try to get funding for the ongoing O&M of these stations. And so Agrimet, Hydromet, which is reclamation, we put in our case that, we're underfunded, and I'll talk about that when I get to my program. But I'm hoping that, especially my cooperative program, so Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Desert Research Institute, that I can fold that under as a cooperative Agrimet program, instead of, them actually being, saw as a state program, that since they're a co-op, that I'm hoping that I can ask for funding for you guys as well, even if it's not at a state level, just because, and Dave talked about how this was a co-op between, or, that developed out of this committee. All of these cooperations and partnerships came out of this committee, or WERA 1022. So, that's just something, and it's still in its infancy. They just were asking, where our funding levels were at, if we felt we were underfunded, and by how much. And then, as it progresses on, that's when I will try to, fight for some funding for you guys as well. So just a little update.
Thanks, Jema, and we certainly appreciate your support for our network expansion over the years as well.
Thanks, Jema. That was a good, I'm glad we circled circle back on a few of those topics. So next on my screen is going to be Mike Crimmins, and after Mike is Mike Anderson.
Can you hear me okay? Great. So just a quick couple of slides here. Just one, and so I'll start right away. Feel a little guilty hearing all these discussions about maintaining stations because I don't have to worry about that. And Jeremy, I'm here for you, whatever I can do. And you too, Dave, if there's anything I can do on this end. But I'll talk a little bit about what I'm trying to do with leveraging some of the networks here in Arizona. And so I'm with Cooperative Extension here at U of A, and in working with a lot of the county agents, one of the things that I've noticed over the last, this has actually been over 10 years, is that a lot of the counties end up investing in flood control gauges and wonder why they're not being used for drought monitoring. So we've tried a couple of things here to, and this is with some support from Emily in the Southwest Climate Hub, is to try to see if we can make any use of these flood control gauges for climate scale monitoring. And as you can imagine, it's a real challenge. The data are really, really messy, but I like messy data, and I think it's kind of interesting to try to play with. So we've got an effort underway right now, which is this multi-network drought monitoring tool that I've developed. And so it's just a prototype where basically pulling data from GHCN, which includes CoCoRa's. We've got a homegrown volunteer network called RainLog here in Arizona, but then I'm also pulling from the Mesonet API, which is going to be the national Mesonet data coming from the Synoptic Labs. And so I'm pulling all that data every day and then basically summing it for a couple of different time periods. And then we're calculating an SPI value against historical PRISM estimates at these particular locations. So it's been really interesting just to kind of watch the data and try to understand kind of when things are behaving well and when they aren't. And then I think that there's some opportunity here, especially with pulling the data from MesoWest and being able to find flood control gauges that are not resetting or going down, because they really do sort of stand out from nearby observations. I've also noticed that the raw sites, we have some trouble with them over time. And then this also is pulling from the CWOP, so the Citizen Weather Observer Program too, which is surprisingly, some of those gauges are actually pretty good when we look at some summaries over time. So this is just a real quick thing that I've been working on, and we're trying to, this is with my colleague Ben McMahon here at CLEMAS, is to see if we can get this data ingested into an operational API with some cleaning and then also some data flags on it that then we can offer it back up for other purposes. So just being able to sort of pull it all into one spot, so one place to actually get the data back out across these multiple networks. And I can drop the link in there if you're interested in sort of poking around on the site and just checking it out. But I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. You have about a minute. Any quick questions for Mike?
Hey, Mike, this is Mike. I don't have any questions for you right yet, but I may seek you out as you'll find out shortly. We've got yet another request from governance, along with a fantastically short deadline of New Year's, to stand up a spatially explicit data webpage.
Oh boy. Well, that's not my expertise, but I'll pitch in if I can.
Well, just maybe asking some feedback on how you're going with some of just pulling data and
absolutely.
And
yeah,
insights from there.
Sure, absolutely. If I can help out, let me know.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. So we'll go ahead with Michael Anderson with your update, and then Jema, you're right after Mike.
All right, everybody. Good to virtually see you all again. So this past year's been pretty exciting. We're in year 2 of a drought. We've had some pretty extreme conditions, including the driest spring and warmest spring on record for California. This had a rather interesting outcome in terms of our water supply forecasting, in that we fantastically over forecast the runoff. And this resulted in some regulatory issues cropping up and sudden attention from the governor's office, inquiring as to why we failed so spectacularly. But if you're willing to tolerate the heat, after that does come the question, what do we do to get better? And that's where we are now. Part of that was in one of the emergency proclamations, the requirement by New Year's to stand up a spatially explicit data site so that people can see where conditions are at any place in the state. So we'll be working with Oregon State with the Prism products and doing some partner work with DRI with advancing some of the climate tracking features. Then pairing with that, the forecast improvement project, where we work on trying to actually improve the water supply forecasting work that we're doing, both for now and again, this fantastic opportunity that showed up Thursday and is due today on what does a program look like by 2030 to pivot or transform the program into a spatially explicit, physically based modeling framework for forecasting going forward. So just about got that done. Fortunately, we've had a lot of good ideas. Some of the pieces going into them, some of you might have heard of the Airborne Snow Observatory, ASO Inc., Tom Painter's shop that he runs out of Mammoth, providing us with LiDAR-based snowpack. It's working well. Trying to build that out into a program. But I guess the best news about that is it makes the O&M costs of station maintenance a whole lot more attractive. Because the data acquisition costs are pretty high. We're also working with our partners down at Scripps in the atmospheric river research work, looking at some innovative observations to try and determine freezing level. Also partnering with UC Merced through a Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart grant, looking at Roger Bales distributed network design. So a lot of activities going on, and hopefully I keep them all pointed in a direction that's positive for the state. But do appreciate this group's help over the years in trying to formulate these ideas of how these different pieces come together. Oh, and on the fire side, well, last year we had our record year. Unfortunately, we're going to destroy that record this year. Last year we had our first 1 million acre fire, and we're well on our way with the Dixie fire this year to exceed that one, unfortunately. So that also provides a nice motivation for recognizing the time for maybe some changes and transformations are at hand. So doing our best to leverage that situation for benefit for our programs. All right, how'd I do?
Good.
Mike, this is
Hey,
Dave.
Yeah, Dave.
Hey, you mentioned that there was a UC Merced project. What was that again? I missed it.
Yeah, it's a Water Smart grant with Roger Bales. So we provided the non-federal match for it, where we have he set up with the National Science Foundation grant a distributed network of stations where he has one station that has the communications to it, but then distributes sensors within line of sight so you can have kind of a high density observation. And we focused them in the rain snow transition zone to really understand what the ground-based observations of that look like relative to what we see with our snow level radar. And just trying to better understand that because that's such a key process to water supply and flood for the West Slope Sierra.
Cool.
So we have it.
What was the range of that line of sight you said, right?
Depends on the basin where we're at in the basin, up to 1 kilometer in some cases.
Okay.
Or we've got elevation playing on our side. We're also going to embark on a really cool project with USGS using LoRa technology, and going to test that out in the Feather in a high density observing network for stream flow. And it's part of their next generation water observing system efforts. So looking forward to that in the next 2 years.
We're working on some LoRa work as well.
Oh, good. I will stay in touch with you then. We can compare notes on how this is going to work in complex terrain. And because if we can pull it off, that decreases our communications costs substantially.
Yeah. Absolutely. I actually did have a question for you about wildfire and climate information. We, the Climate Hub directors were just asked to communicate the complexities of climate change and wildfire by region. And I wonder if you are asked to do that very often and how you address that in California.
Yes, that question comes up often, although they pretty much jump to the conclusion that the notable change in fire behavior that we've seen over the last 3 years is attributed to climate change. And trying to then kind of get them to walk back a little bit and kind of think the way through that it's not solely climate change, but you also have at least half a century of forest management as your stage upon which climate change is working. The two working together create an environment where extreme fire behavior is the more likely outcome to be experienced. And so, again, a lot of partner work here with Department of Conservation and CAL FIRE, and trying to identify those observations that talk about forest health, fuel moisture, and then this concept that we're working on now, this background state of the watershed. And working with the USGS, some of you folks might know Alan and Lori Flint and their basin characterization model, and using a parameter from there called climatic water deficit to really talk about how the watersheds, as the world's getting warmer, the watersheds are becoming drier as a consequence. And then really trying to figure out how to leverage that model and that information to create a framework to manage the resources. So hopefully we'll have something for you on that in a couple of years too.
Thank you. That sounds great. So Jema, you're next on my screen, and after you, it looks like Lauren Parker.
So I'm Jema. I think I know some of you. I work for the Bureau of Rec. I'm the AgriMet program coordinator. I was for a while the only federal partner or member, and now we've got the Climate Hubs on here, so that's awesome. Been a member of this committee for 12 or 13 years. So AgriMet, we lost Bonneville Power funding a few years ago. We've replaced about 50% of that with the Corps. There was some doom and gloom where budget was cut on the reclamation side through appropriated funds by about 50%. Then it was fully reinstated. And then they gave me $150,000 in drought funding. So it's always now on August 27th, and like Wednesday is the last day to allocate on our charge cards. So, it's just kind of how it goes. It's feast or famine, and it's usually like the threat of famine, and then it's a feast. So we're installing 6 new weather stations with that money. We'll have one in Walla Walla in Washington, 4 additional ones in Oregon, kind of spread across, and then one in Lincoln County, Idaho, which is South Central Idaho. So I'm excited about that. We're going to fill some gaps that currently don't, have a station in a Landsat scene or whatever, and that's kind of what we're working towards with Jordan Beamer, OWRD. So OWRD is picking up funding for 5 of them, and I have a local farmer that's going to pick one up here. I mentioned the NOAA money or call for information. Hopefully we'll be hearing more on that, and I will just kind of update the group or the parties that I currently partner with. I don't know that I can help anybody that we're not currently kind of in that cooperative group, but we'll see. And it may not just be federally, it may be like statewide too, just climate networks or monitoring stations just in general. So AgriMet's been around since 1983. We started with 3 stations. I think I have 103 that I'm responsible for, and then 150 that Reclamation owns, and we pull in over 300 into our database. And that's with Dave, New Mexico, Colorado, through the Upper Colorado River Commission, and Utah Desert Research Institute. So, you know, we've expanded, we became this like cooperative group, aggregates for measuring evapotranspiration, or ET. So these are all ET networks that we pull in. We do have some that are not, you have to pardon me, I'm having my house remodeled, so there's construction in the background. But I think that this paradigm shift in my career, I've been with Reclamation for almost 15 years, and you know, it's becoming this really widely accepted and used means, and so the funding's like not followed that. So I'm currently the only employee, and I cover weather stations, or I have weather stations in 10 states. We are a PN, or Pacific Northwest Region program, which is out of Boise, and basically follows kind of the Columbia River watershed. But Agrimet is, well, it is managed by the PN region. It is now in all the Reclamation regions. So we kind of expand outside of the PN boundaries. Yeah, so I'm excited to hopefully see that the funding's maybe gonna finally follow. So our budget's about $300,000 when we're fully funded, $330,000. Like I said, I'm the only full-time employee. I do have I usually have a student that I share with our Hydromet program. But currently that position is empty and has been for almost a year. So just like everybody else, we're having a hard time hiring. So I basically do everything from contracting to calibrations, site installations, maintenance visits, budget. I mean, I just, like, you name it, website, everything is what I do. So hopefully with some of that funding, we'll be able to get like another technician or full-time employee is what I'm hoping. So that's kind of where I'm at. We can talk more. So do you guys have any questions, or where are we at on time? Am I a minute?
I couldn't unmute. Yeah, there's enough time there's about a minute for question. How likely is it that you're going to get help? Like another student, something.
So hopefully, like, we do have a student that's helping us a little bit, but he's an admin student, and so our student position's open, but it took us over 2 years to get our Hydromet manager hired, so like my supervisor, and that's a pretty important position. I don't know, it's taken like a couple of years to fill positions right now, which is, I mean, unless they're like, you know, assistant regional director or something, they get filled right away, but for a student, for us, is not high priority. So.
Okay, thanks. I think, was any other questions for Jema?
I was going to ask, with all of the many responsibilities you carry with Agrimet, how often are you able to recalibrate each station on average?
Every year.
Okay. All right.
So
great.
I just, like, I'm still calibrating. I normally try to get it done this spring, but my daughter's a senior this year and I coach track and stuff. So I'm not I'm not able to go like in the spring like I used to. So now I tend to go a little bit later in the fall. But yeah, we go I just got back from Klamath Falls, and, you know, I was talking about water situations. I live in Lincoln County, Idaho, which is South Central Idaho. And we had like 20 days of water. We were off by June 10th. And then like all of our reservoirs around here are now cow pastures. So they're grazing cattle on the old reservoir floors. So it's pretty dry, pretty dire. Hopefully we get a good year. So yeah, our standard is to calibrate every year. And I still have just a handful of sites in Northern Idaho and Eastern Oregon left. So I'll visit like 110 of them this year.
Okay.
And that's in seven states. So.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. All right, so next would be Lauren Parker with the California Hub, and then after Lauren, Russell Qualls.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Parker. I'm a coordinator and a research fellow with the California Climate Hub. And we operate more in that value add space, kind of hearkening back to our objectives that Emily shared at the top of the meeting. And so in thinking about some of the things that we've been working on this past year, with regards to creating some of these value add products with the data and information that are collected from monitoring networks. We are partnering with folks at UCANR, so that Agriculture and Natural Resources arm of the UC system, and UC Merced researchers in developing a web-based interactive suite of tools for California agricultural producers called Climate. It's not public facing quite yet, but we're getting there. And it pulls data from Prism at the moment. So it's not pulling directly from monitoring networks. We decided to go with a gridded approach to developing the tools rather than station-based approach. But that will allow folks to view in real time, or at least up to yesterday, in season calculations of things like growing degree days, overlaid with crop phenology or pest phenology to support, real-time decision-making, in-season decision-making for ag producers. We'll have some tools like chill accumulation and things like that on that tool. And then also upcoming, kind of, again, thinking back to some of the objectives of this group, in terms of leveraging resources, we're working with Cooperative Extension to do some outreach and education with the hope of developing a pretty extensive and detailed curriculum for technical service providers in California around climate variability and change issues in agriculture. The degree to which that gets accomplished is going to depend on funding, which we hope to hear about by the end of this month, I believe. And then on the fire side, that's not a space where I work closely. So I'm not as familiar with the details, but I can share that one of the things that we've been working on, and again, this is something that's not ready for prime time yet, but upcoming, ideally by the end of the calendar year, I would think, is a decision support tool dashboard maybe not quite by the end of the calendar year. I don't want to overpromise. But a decision support tool dashboard for post-fire restoration. And that's a project that we're working with CAL FIRE on. So that's kind of just a little bit of hitting the highlights of some of the things that we've been up to the last year and looking forward over the next year with respect to some of the objectives of this group.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Any quick questions for Lauren? Okay, so Russell Qualls, we'll go ahead and hear your update, and then Katie and I have 4 things I want to mention after you, and that's it.
Can you hear me? Will I be able to share my screen? I'll just toss a couple of things up.
Yes, you should be able to. It's a green button.
Make sure I can find the right one. Okay, here. Do you guys see it?
Almost. Yeah.
Almost.
Yes.
Is it there?
It is.
Okay.
It's here, and now it just switched to yes. We should be
Okay.
good.
All right. So I'm Russ Qualls. I'm the Idaho State state climatologist, and I've been here since the very end of 1999. And so I'll just talk a little bit about a few things that I've been doing. To remember how to, I'm having trouble. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this year I rebuilt the website that we use, and this is just a sort of a quick picture of the top banner picture. And I won't mention much about this other than that we're providing some climate resources on the website. It's fairly simple because of the funding that is available here. So climate resources in terms of where people can get climate data, as well as things like JAMA. We do link to AgriMet for evapotranspiration. We also link to SNOTEL and the NCEI, and we also have a current climate map for the state. And so in terms of activities that I've been involved in this year, because of the significant drought in the West, and particularly the here in the Northwest, I've been on these committees for a long time, but they've been really active this year with the State Drought Committee that is hosted by the Idaho Department of Water Resources. And we meet weekly actually online with that committee, and it provides input every week to the U.S. Drought Monitor. So we're trying to give some local input to the Drought Monitor. I also serve on the federal Pacific Northwest Drought Early Warning Network, or DEWS system network committee that meets fairly regularly, not quite as often, but putting out kind of drought statements for the Northwest. In terms of leveraging of resources in the state of Idaho, because of the irrigated ag, as in many other Western states, the water supply is really a significant issue. And so much of the work that I've done there is I don't have like a network or anything that I'm managing, given the limited resources that are available. So I'm working with readily available data from remote sensing of snowpack in mountainous areas to be able to quantify the snowmelt pattern, which is then useful for runoff modeling for water supply. And just briefly, the challenge there is that the remote sensing of snow cover is a visible product. So cloud cover, as you see here, is problematic. And during the spring melt season, that mountainous areas are really commonly obscured by clouds. And what we have done is to combine multiple years of daily remote sensing to come up with the kind of the recurrent snowmelt patterns. This is the pattern essentially that is observed every year. And this is sort of the end result of it, but it shows that the snowmelt across, this is the upper Snake Basin, so the Tetons are over here. But the basin is, this shows the pattern that the melt follows every year with very high accuracy, and it occurs at different times of year, but the same pattern is followed regardless of whether it's a significant drought year or whether it's a year that is has abundant snowpack, or whether it starts to melt early or late. The same pattern is recurrent. This allows us to go back in and to correct the images that have significant cloud cover, to be able to see what the current snow cover over the basin is on a given day. So for example, when there's 75% snow cover, as indicated by this, the red line through here. So 75% of the basin is still covered by snow. Every year, the snow line lies very closely to the red line shown here. And as you expand outward to 50% snow cover, the blue line, and then 25% snow cover by the green line, every year, regardless of whether it's a drought year or a heavy snowpack year or when the melt occurs, the snow line is about at this location every year. So that is really what we're looking to do that for, is both to correct the remote sensing in near real time for snow, and then also to be able to use that information for snowmelt runoff modeling. So for just as an example for the cloud removal, if this is the basin, and if the snow area is indicated by the blue and the snow-free area is indicated by the brown, and then an imposed cloud is given by this hatched area. So this was actually an almost clear day, and we took an actual cloud from a different day and covered it. And what you see is these kind of lighter colored or brighter browns and blues are where you can actually see through the hatched snow cover, or sorry, the hatched cloud cover. And so you only really see little snippets of where the snow line is, this black line along here. There's a little tiny bit that would be visible on this day up here, and then a little bit down here. And from just that little bit of where you can see the snow line, given the results from our research, you can then basically infill the entire snow line. So this black line here was done using this method, just with this little tiny bit visible. We were able to infill what the snow line we would expect it to be throughout the whole basin. And so you can see that it actually lines up very, very closely with what is actually on the ground in the blue snow covered area, and the brown, the black line that we're drawing from our method is the estimated snow line, despite the fact that we can only see this little tiny bit here, little tiny bit here, and then maybe a little bit more up here. So that's all that I'll do, but that we think is really useful, or is going to be useful for snowmelt runoff modeling with 4 partners like the NRCS that hosts the SNOWTEL network and things like that. And we're still working on kind of expanding to that runoff modeling type of work from this. And but there are lots of opportunities this create with data sharing and kind of value added product to data that's been readily available for a long time, but is not currently used very much because of the extensive cloud cover during the spring snowmelt season. All right, I'll go ahead and stop there.
Excellent. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks.
Any quick questions for Russ?
Hey, Russ, this is Dave.
Hi, go ahead.
I was wondering, kind of throwing out what does anybody ever use like remote cameras? Looking horizontally.
I've thought about that. It'd be useful to have some remote cameras at SNOWTEL stations and things like that, where we had a SWE measurement and where we could actually watch the snow line. So I didn't mention this when I was talking, but what we're working with for remote sensing is the MODIS data from the Aqua and Terra satellites. And those have a spatial resolution of about 500 meters. So it's much coarser than what you would see from a camera. And I know that there are some small scale field experiments. I know that there have been some experiments in California where they've looked at these at a finer resolution. So if you wanted to go, say, and compare those with Landsat, that's like a 20-meter resolution, that would be a useful thing to do. And we're actually interested in taking the Landsat, which is available with a much coarser temporal resolution, really only every 16 days. There are 2 of them, so you might get every 8 days. But then if it's cloud covered, that might you don't have as frequently recurring measurements to kind of generate the quality of the image that we get by using the MODIS, which is a daily product, even though it's a coarser spatial resolution. But there is some work. I haven't worked with cameras, but I know that there is some work out of the University of Washington where people are doing that because they're working at kind of a finer scale of things.
Perfect. Thanks. I will just give a very brief update from the Southwest Climate Hub on 4 of the projects that we've been working on. And I'll ask Katie to jump in and expand on anything if she would like to, or add anything else she might want to. So we're working on a monitoring, I see your thumbs up, thanks Katie. We're working on a monitoring station inventory overlaid with tribal lands, tribal boundaries to help the siting and location of additional monitoring stations. This is in New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. So we have a graduate student working on that for us in hopes that it will be available and accessible to tribal natural resource managers as well to support some of their needs. So looking to the data there. That's one activity that's happening. And just to back up for a second, so the climate hubs operate in 3 functional areas. We do research and science synthesis. We also do tool development for decision making. And importantly, we convene scientists and stakeholders around critical climate questions. So those are the 3 areas we try to operate in. And as those overlap with your programs, we certainly are around and want to support them. The second thing I wanted to mention was the Drought Learning Network, the Southwest Drought Learning Network. So that is a group of climate service providers and natural resource managers. And there are 5 teams that are working together around some critical issues. And I can describe those a little bit more later if you're interested, but it's been really moving forward pretty well. It's a collaboration between NIDIS, National Integrated Drought Information System, NDMC, and the climate hubs. So there's a lot of opportunities to work a little bit more deeply on some critical drought questions through that group. The third thing I want to mention is that we're working more deliberately with a climate adaptation framework with small groups of people. So it's actually, we worked in Hawaii recently, and soon we're starting with Upper Rio Grande irrigators to work through a decision framework related to climate change and management objectives. And that is something that we hope to expand. We work with some national parks recently as well. So that's the third thing. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is part of the LORA that Mike Anderson brought up. So that's part of a Sustainable Southwest Beef project that was funded out of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. So one of their big projects. And we're looking at the use of LORA for multiple things. Cattle collars, tracking cattle. So this is a rangelands application, not a variable terrain application. Also water level sensors and precipitation monitoring, kind of finer scale. So that's something we could talk about more in the future. If you noticed on the agenda, even though this is just a 2-hour meeting, I put in a 10-minute break. And the reason that I did that is because I'm hopeful that after that 10 minutes, we will all turn our cameras on and we will actually be present around some questions for 45 minutes, and then we'll be done with this meeting. So I think now is our 10-minute break to go get a drink, check your email, anything you want to do, and then we'll reconvene at a quarter after. So took a little bit of time, but we'll reconvene at a quarter after for 45 minutes to talk through a few questions. Sound good?
It does. However, I will be pivoting to my phone to go carry out kid duty. So I will be listening to you all, but you unfortunately won't get to see my shiny face during that process. But my kids will get to listen in and enjoy the wonders of our conversation.
All right, that sounds good. Thanks. So we'll see you in at a quarter after, and we'll work through a few sort of targeted questions around this group. All right, thanks. Always really fast. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for coming back. I appreciate it. I feel like in our Zoom world where we have to focus and pay attention for hours on these calls, we just need more breaks. So even though it was only 2 hours, I hope that was enough for our minds to help us come back and have a conversation now for the next 45 minutes and get to a shared place. So if you're able to turn on your cameras, if you're back with us, that would be great. And my first question for the group is not where I wanted to go with the conversation, but it's around what's needed for this group. And that is, I know you have to do reporting to Ed Martin and you have to come up with annual plans, I believe. Is that right? And is there any need for conversation about that? I don't have to do that, so I'm not sure what, I think you did do some type of end of year report, most of you, that you sent in to Ed. Do you need
Yeah.
something? Yeah, okay.
I think we in the past we've generated, and I think there's like a template, like mainly just a topic, and I think it was 6 topics or something like that, and kind of address stakeholders, who we worked with, what products and things like that. And it's up to us to provide the write-up to whoever's writing the report and kind of compile it all into a compact document.
And are you good? You're all good with that at this point?
I mean, it's fine. Can somebody remind me what the status of didn't we have to submit a proposal recently? And I remember a bunch of emails, but I don't remember what the outcome of that is.
Yeah, I thought Mike Anderson, were you part of that I don't know if he's.
Yeah, I think it went in last fall, Dave.
Yeah.
I think that all got squared away and Ed kind of shepherded in with Mike.
Okay. So then there's one action item is just to confirm that, and I'll put that down here to check with. So I don't know if Mike's the right person to check in with or Ed or both, but we'll check in.
Yeah, Ed sent an email out. I think right at the time you were coordinating us, Emily, on that. And so he just asked for the state reports to go to him around the 30th. If I think it could even be a little bit past that, but I think that email is still in my inbox.
Okay, so it sounds like Ed needs the state reports around the end of this month. Right, awesome. Okay, sounds great. Do we need to talk about that at all anymore, or are we all on the same page? And
I was just going to add a comment. The question came up about the current status of the proposal, and I'm not quite sure, except that Mike had sent out an email middle of last May that said that it had been reviewed, and he sent the comments out to all of us. And then I haven't heard anything more since then. There hasn't really been anything on it posted, I don't think, since about May. So I'm not quite sure of the status of it, of the final outcome.
Okay, perfect. Those are 2 things we'll check in on, and via email to the whole group, and then we'll know. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and transition since we have just a little bit more time here, and I'm going to use the chat box. And I'm going to give everybody some time to think about whatever question I put in the chat box, and then we can have a little bit of a conversation about that question. And so the first question, I have one I'm toying with throwing in there, and I think I will. Okay, I'm going to totally turn my agenda on its head and do something different, because that's always great. So what's one pressing thought you have related to the team reports, related to what you heard from everyone just recently? I'm going to put that in the chat box. I'm asking you to think about it, type your answer, but don't hit enter yet. So take a minute. We're going to take 60 seconds and think about kind of what's on your mind based on what everyone said in the reports. Okay, go ahead and hit enter. See what we've got. Okay, so funding challenges for station networks. Oh, sorry, I didn't give everybody enough time. Sorry about that. Yeah, so let's see how similar we're all thinking about. A lot of similarities here. So I see a few things popping up, right? What does everybody else see in these responses? Or does somebody want to verbalize what's on their mind?
Yeah, just to break the awkward silence. I didn't mention it when I was introducing myself earlier on and the work with ASMET that we have ongoing, but certainly funding's there. It's an issue for us. Right now, we're largely bottom-up funding, individual contributions. There is some top-down funding, if you will, contracts with Bureau of Reclamation for our Colorado River stations, contract with the city of Phoenix for some of the ET numbers there. But yeah, we're finding that probably having both of those approaches is going to be necessary. And we're open to ideas as far as how to further expand on them.
I'm struck by the funding challenges and how that is pretty consistent, along with a desire for collaboration and opportunities for broader collaboration. That's what I see popping up here. Russ, Schumacher, you put in something a little longer. Did you want to talk about it?
Well, I was just going to say, I think I mean, right, funding is always like the sort of top of mind with these, but then on the flip side, it also, when there are periods when funding is not a challenge, then there's different challenges, because then it's like, right, like, Dave, you got 900K, like, it's not like you can just like hire 10 people for 1 year to install stations and then let them go, probably, and or whatever the case might be. And so it's like, and that's sort of the place we're in now, is like our funding portfolio looks pretty good, but now we need the people with the right skills to do the work, and everything's always slow with university bureaucracy and all of that. So if it's not one thing, then it's something else, I guess, is all I was saying. But I imagine we all have to worry about all of these things at one time or another. So it's good to have people to bounce ideas off of.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks, Russ.
Yeah, that's kind of what, I mean, I didn't write a lot, but that's kind of what I was thinking as well, is, it's having, this, we've got some national things going on, but then I think the role of this can play is sort of having a local network, a group that you're familiar with, you know what's going on, and you could, I can go and, and visit, easily visit, the other 3 states that have mesonets and collaborate a little easier. So I think that, there's some things that we could probably go regionally, even with funding. I think there's things, and then maybe that's one of the ideas that Jama brought up, is maybe there's something we can do within that tie with reclamation or whatever we decide, or even with tribes, that's, and then the hub also plays like a pivotal role in terms of connecting. So it's, I mean, you really need to make use of that. And I think that's, instead of just doing kind of our own thing, it'd be nice to have like one project that we kind of all work on. And that I've always wanted to have that. And we usually meet and just kind of do our own projects and report back on those projects, which is fine. But it's more of, I think we should really, if we're going to spend the time to meet like this, it'd be good to have some kind of a joint thing that we work on.
And I think maybe something, you know, we've always looked at like a tangible project, but maybe like a collaborative project that we could work on is finding some kind of funding or pushing for some kind of, whether it be federal funding or something that kind of ties back in with that. Like, you know, we have some pretty intelligent people in our group, and, you know, we're 1022 does as well. And I just think that we could possibly like join forces and kind of go at it as once as like this whole need for monitoring sites, you know, whether it be agricultural or meteorological and stuff. Like, everybody uses our data. People are using so much data. Nobody wants to pay for it. You know, and it's critical for their research. It's critical for these tools they make. And, you know, as federal data, you know, you've got corporations mining our data and using it and selling it and stuff. So like, maybe there's just some kind of a solution or some way we can just go about it, like all as a whole, you know, to address that this need exists. And, you know, they'll spend, you know, and on reclamation, you see like these fish projects or these, you know, irrigation projects, and their reclamation's budget is, you know, huge. And, you know, I'm fighting for an extra $50,000 a year, which is, you know, just ends up being peanuts. But, you know, $50,000 a year, I think in anybody's network would make a huge significant difference. So where it's probably just waste, you know, in most government programs, it's not a high level. So that's just my thought. Maybe we can do something like that, and kind of one of us at a time is not, you know, as effective as if we all come together and, you know, make some noise.
So does anybody have, thank you. Thanks, Jema. If you don't have an immediate response to what Jema just said, then I have another question that I'm thinking might help us advance a collaborative project idea. Looking to see if anybody wants to say anything.
I was going to just make a little bit of a comment, and I don't know that this is just sort of an example of something and not necessarily like this is the, you know, the answer to the question. And I know that JMI Agromet has a pretty standardized instrumentation set up and package that they use. And I don't remember from your talk whether you mentioned, you talked about the kind of the expansion to quite a few additional states. And are those all the standard Agromet type of monitoring station? And regardless of what the answer to that is there an opportunity to link together with some of the mesonets? For example, if, you know, you took New Mexico's mesonet, and if there was, and could you do the Agromet calculations for the evapotranspiration based on the data from other types of mesonets, and particularly if you could try to try to standardize them? Like, I know that Agromet, I think your most of your measurements are like at 6 feet, whereas a typical mesonet might be measuring at 10 meters or something. And could you, at least with the wind speeds and things, scale it down using just the logarithmic profile to, you know, standard Agromet height to produce the evapotranspiration, and try to basically take that product and expand it further outward? And I guess related to that is possibility if there were mesonet stations that didn't necessarily have all the instrumentation. Most of them were going to have temperature and humidity and things like that. But if they needed, say, solar radiation to kind of complete the Agromet package, maybe there's an opportunity there to link together with Bureau of Reclamation or somebody, say, hey, let's find, you know, where would it be strategically beneficial for Reclamation to expand their network by tapping into other networks?
Yeah, so you know, and I only had 5 minutes. I've given my presentation to at least Dave and Mike Anderson. They've heard it 15 times. But so when we started this cooperative project, we follow ASC standards. We have the 2 meters. We moved our wind sensors up to 3 meters, and then we bring it back down for the equation. We do pull in other networks like INL. I think we pull in 12 or 15. I'd have to go double check, but
yeah,
of their sites, and they're on the towers, the high towers, 15 meters, I believe. So we scale that down. So when we first partnered up with Utah Climate Center through Roger Hansen out of the Provo office, and he had a bunch of funding. So we gave them about $120,000 worth of equipment to upgrade all their sensors to our standard sensor suite. And then Reclamation already had a handful of sites in Utah that they essentially they had funding to put them in, and then they, you know, and that's my biggest pet peeve is you get this money for this one-time thing, or, you know, 3 years of O&M, and then they just leave them to rot. And that's kind of how they'd been. A lot of them hadn't even been touched in 20 years. So we went through and upgraded those to our standard sensors, to our standard stations, salvaged what we could, which was not a whole lot, and relocated some of them to more ideal locations. And so in exchange, Utah's taking care of those stations in Utah for us. And at some point that scale is going to tip. And I think we're almost there where it started out with 9 stations. And I think we ended up putting in 21 new stations or something that the Utah Climate Center takes care of. Colorado State was kind of the same way. I think that they went, and I wasn't as involved in the whole process, but Jim Prairie out of the and he's in Colorado anyways, had the funding, and they you know, used it to upgrade some of their existing sites and add in new sites in Colorado for reclamation. So kind of the standard of this you know, cooperative is that we would help the states with equipment to upgrade their sensors to our standards. And then in turn, we would ingest the data, do QA/QC, perform QA/QC on it, which we do daily. And, you know, so we were trying to, you know, my ultimate goal was to kind of to bring in all this data and like under, you know, standardized conditions. They agreed to do their yearly calibrations, you know, like, and we worked with him and trained him on how we do our calibrations, gave them calibration equipment, that kind of stuff. So, you know, that is something that came out of this group, and the WERA 1022 group. And of course I lost my student, and then, you know, it's just got to the point where I just don't have time to do anything except keep my network alive right now. So, but yeah, that was the ultimate plan. And then, you know, with having that relationship established, they have a little more pull because we're ingesting their data. You know, that it validates their program a little bit more. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Great. And then oops, sorry. Technical difficulties here. Knocked my mouse onto the floor. I see Mike Anderson put something into the chat box, and oh good, *6 worked. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, so responding to everything everybody's saying while I was driving. Yeah, Ed and I responded based on the comments back to us from the committee. Their biggest concern was a lack of products that the committee had produced over the previous iterations, and so we promised to do better, but didn't really give them too much in that regard. So I think if we could, as a group, rally around a product of sorts, that would go a long ways to the powers that be over this committee to view us in a better light. And they do recognize what we're doing is important and worthwhile. So they're just hoping to try and actually extract something out of us for our efforts.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get everybody's ideas for what a collaborative project that with some tangible outputs, what that would look like. So I'm going to use the same method, which is using the chat box. What are your ideas for something that's feasible? What is a feasible collaborative project across this region? So I'll give you a minute to think about your knowledge of the needs and how we could work together. Is everybody ready? Okay, I'll go ahead and hit enter, and we can all do the same if you have some ideas. Okay, so Dave Dubois and I are tracking, and it's because of Russ's idea from before, so that's cool. Production of snowmelt patterns from mountainous areas in the West. That'd be really cool. I was curious about what you were finding, Russ, in your area and how that would apply in the more southern mountains. And then Russ, new visualization mapping tools for Western weather networks. Cool. Yeah, I like that. So building off of what Mike Crimmins has done, but more broadly across the network. So these are three really tangible, great ideas, actually. Thoughts?
Since I didn't type anything in the chat, I feel obliged to talk. Since we're thinking about funding challenges, of course, the other one side of that is reducing costs. And I know folks gave examples of certain things they're doing to reduce costs in monitoring in other ways. I believe Mike Anderson had a few of those examples in California, for instance. One of the things ASMET's going to be doing in the not so distant future is working with the data science group within our College of Agriculture to automate as much as possible some of the QA/QC issues and things related to that. In theory, having more of that automated than not free up some of my time to do other things. And so what we're able to do with a given amount of money is increased effectively with some of the automation. So I'll just throw it out. If automation of the QA/QC stuff, machine learning algorithms, whatever they might be, I know that phrase is tossed around as a solution for everything nowadays, but just as an example, I'll toss that out and yeah, see if it has any traction with anyone else.
Jeremy, I'll pile in too. I'm sorry. Okay, I was going to say, yeah, I think we did talk about this a little bit, Jeremy, but we should keep going on that too, because I think within our CLEMAS project too, of trying to bring in some of these other networks that are not, official, well maintained. I think there's still utility in them, but we do have to have better ways of spotting problematic data if we're even going to try to use those. So it could be kind of a bottom up, is using some of these lower tier networks maybe does help support some of these more official networks. And I like the idea with the machine learning. Sorry, Dave.
No, I was just going to say, following on that thought, because you mentioned, Mike, you mentioned using some of the CWAP, and that's kind of, there's a lot of stations, but it's like how, which ones are good, and it's like some of them are sitting on, right below the rooftop, so it's blocked or something, but it's like, but there's some that are really sited well, and it's like, how do we, and that's a group that are in like trees and things that you may not see, and then comparing with other networks. Well, I think I really like to see what you guys are doing. Now that we're ramping up, looking at a lot more data, things that are going to get a lot complicated really quick. And, and having, I know, Jama, you had with your student, I remember chatting with you about having a student that looks at the data, and I've visited the Oklahoma folks, and they have like a whole room of students. We can't afford that, but it's more of so what can data science, is there something that can work here in the West that would really help?
And I get a lot of questions about like how we data check, like what does that look like? What does it mean? Maybe we could just do like a web page or something, and that like identifies different types of sensors and different anomalies you can see in the data. And I have a really good start on that for my like training my students, like what does it look like if there's a power line shading the solar sensor? What does it look like if a bucket's leaking, and or just different things like that? And how do you fix that? Like, do you interpolate? Do you like what is a suggested? And I think we have enough expertise in this group that we could have a really well-informed guide to how do you perform QA/QC? How do you edit data? Do you just delete it as missing or whatever? And I think that would be actually fairly simple, and it would give a tool, and it would be something that is pretty highly needed. I get asked, that's one of the biggest questions I get, is how do we do data checking, like, or quality control? Like, what is it, what do you even do? So that could be something that we could produce as well.
Jim, is any of that, or actually for any of you running networks, is any of your QA/QC automated, or is it really all kind of brute force digging into the data at a given station?
No, we have a lot that's automated. And so Agrimet went to cell modems in 2012, and that eliminated a lot of bad data from missing or garbled satellite transmits, because we were in GOES before. So now the only time we have bad data is when the sensor's bad. And so I think it probably took our data quality from like 99 to like 99.999. It's very rare that we have, aside that from the problem we have with our temperature and humidity sensor, which is always a pain, but that's part of our drought funding, is to replace all those. We currently use the Rotronic and they sensor, and they seem to fail all the time. But we do have automated. So like we have a Linux machine that connects to all the sites every hour and pulls data in. And so we have a very kind of rudimentary automated process. It looks at, we have kind of a min max for that sensor. So like if it's a temperature, it's -40 to, which is the limit of the sensor, to like 120. And then if it's above that, it'll flag it. And then it sends us an email every time there's a flag data point. And so then sometimes you go in there and you look at it and you're like, yep, it was 120, and then it also looks at rate of change. So we set a rate of change, like the temperature shouldn't increase more than, I don't know, we even have like 15 degrees or decrease 15 degrees. And so it sets like these hard flags, we call them, so it won't use it in the daily computation. But we can go back in there and delete that flag out, just delete it. And then and then it'll go into there, but it just kind of assigns this flag, sends an email that this is an issue. We also get emails if it's not able to connect to a site, if there's any missing values, different things like that. We don't have anything that automatically edits data, but it does at least flag it and take it out of the daily computation. And then we go back in and we look at all of our data points of the 15-minute data and then the daily data, just in a graphical sense with all of our stations grouped together geographically. So we have an in-house thing that we just kind of go through this list of presets. So we have kind of like all the Treasure Valley sites, which is the Boise area sites for people that don't know Treasure Valley, are kind of grouped together. And then you can see, those trends and patterns, just make sure that they're making sense and following along the way they need to be. And then we can either edit the 15-minute data and rerun, which would automatically rerun the daily value, or we can just delete out any bad 15-minute data and estimate the daily, just depending on what's going on. So yeah, it's just, I think, and our annual calibrations, but looking at that data every day, we pretty much know what we're getting into when we go out for the annual calibrations. So it's just more of a field verification for that data. Then we're not actually calibrating sensors. We are. Our precip gauges, adjusting scale factors on our solar radiation. For temperature and humidity sensors every other year, you're bringing them back in and doing a calibration in our humidity chamber, that kind of stuff. But
thanks. I see Jeremy typing, capturing all this, and I'm recording too, so we'll have this well in the notes. Watching the clock. And I want to make sure everybody has a minute for a last word in terms of final thoughts and next steps with action items, basically. So I'm going to just go as you are on my screen, and Mike Crimmins, sorry to do this to you because I'm asking you for final thoughts right away. But yeah, anything in terms of final thoughts and action items?
So one thought that I didn't write down because I pulled back from it was there's a bunch of academics on here too, and I wonder in writing some kind of piece that talks about the importance of these networks in the Western US. So some illustration of all the networks and their strengths and the challenges that they're seeing that could be written up and published. I mean, is that if it's just an academic exercise, it's not useful, but if it could be then used to help make cases at different levels of funding, is that useful? So I just throw that out there. That's my pitch.
I think that sounds like a good idea. And I think that then, if that was to be published, then that would give people who are going to funding agencies and things, they would a citable document to go to that specifically address the West, because there are some different challenges in the West than elsewhere. And so having a document like that, and it would also sort of fulfill the requirement of the WERA102 requirements of actually having kind of production output from the group.
Great.
So to follow up on that real quick, I have stumbled across in the last couple of weeks BAM's article. Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society by Mahmoud et al. That dealt kind of on that topic where they describe what mesonets are and some of the importance there. So that was really an overview piece of mesonets generally. So I think if we could, if we were to go down this line, which I think does have value, making it more specific to our region of the country, certainly, and getting into some of more of the details too. That many of which we've been discussing today. I think there would be a niche for that, to my knowledge.
And I think
What would we-
our 1022 group came up last year, you know, because we needed a product as well about having like a website with links to all the different mesonets and, you know, what kind of stations they offer, like just a little blurb about each of them. So that might be something to consider too.
This is a group of very busy people. What would we need to do that? Do we need a student? Do we need somebody to spearhead the article, the synthesis, and what maybe what Jema just mentioned?
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest part because we are all very busy and we all get together, and you know, the in-person meetings are way better. But I think then we just, you know, get on the plane or hang up the phone call and move on, and you don't even think about it until next year when you get together again. So yeah, just finding somebody that's willing to take it on. I cannot commit. I'm drowning right now. So
I think we might need a student or some funds and to figure out how to have a person help us make that happen. So maybe that's part of that. Also, another need I heard you say, Jema, was an in-person meeting. Like, this is nice to see everybody, but this doesn't work very well. And so I wonder yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like I think, you know, we had it there, and I'm not sure, I don't remember where you guys hosted, but you know, you've experienced an in-person meeting. They're just like the fact that we can give a presentation in 5 minutes. We usually have like an hour and then we go over, and you know, and then, you know, going to dinner. And I know that's not the state of society right now, but you know, it's just that collaboration and interaction. And maybe we just plan on having a one day of presentations and discussion and one day of just busting it out, like just all get together and like do something so we have a tangible tool, and then we don't have to worry about it till next year. You know, I think we could do a lot of what we've just suggested, and even if it's just really rough, at least we have a start, and then if somebody has some time, they can pick it up and polish it. Assuming we're going to go back to normal at some point in my lifetime.
We can plan for normal. We can plan for normal a year from now. I feel like I keep doing that. But we could hope for an actual in-person meeting of this group around this time next year.
Yeah,
happy to host in Las Cruces. Yeah.
And I think it would be very beneficial to have a working day where we actually do something and provide something. And at the end of the day, we have something that we can say, here's what we did. And I think that's all, you know, if each one of part of it. So yeah, I don't think we have a lot of ag researchers in this group, so September is probably a good time. I know it's the end of fiscal year for us, but that's not a huge deal. So
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. I'm going to move on to Jeremy. Did you have any final thoughts or next steps that you wanted to add beyond what you've said?
Perhaps nothing more than the modernization of ASMET, and we'll get caught up to where a lot of the rest of you are at in terms of the data storage and access and information products. So I think we'll be on a better level to collaborate in the near future, you know, more on a level playing field, if you will, and help with the discussion of future activities and product development and things like that. So yeah, we're heading to a better place here, and hopefully we'll be able to make a good contribution to this group moving forward.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Russ Schumacher, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, nothing really to add. Just been a good discussion, and yeah, I know these, as others have said, it's always kind of hard to keep these going after the meeting, but we'll see what we can do, I guess.
All right, thanks. Dave Dubois, you're next.
Yeah, I think the idea that Mike brought up was good. I think I know there was another one, a similar type of effort with, I think it was the freeze from this last year. I know Becky was involved in that in Colorado. Basically that Southern Great Plains, kind of tied to an event, kind of writing that up either for a conference or a journal article could be something kind of topical, depending on what how much interest. Yeah, and I think along the lines of funding, I think, just keeping an eye out, collaboration through multiple, even if it's just 2 states, that would be great. Just getting the ball rolling for those kind of collaborations, and myself included, is, if there's something that can be done small, then that's, I would say go for it.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Mike Anderson, I see you just joined us again after the pickup. So we're talking
I'm
about,
back.
hello, we're talking
Hi.
final thoughts and next steps. And Russell Qualls, Russ, you're next.
All right. Well, one, great to virtually see everybody. Hopefully one of these days we'll get together again. One, thank you, Emily, for rounding up the gang and getting the meeting organized and scheduled. That's a huge help. I will, in terms of follow-on thoughts, circle back with Ed and see if we got, if there's anything else we have to do to formalize the committee's existence with the USDA and the WERA program, and let everybody know. And then I'm just looking forward to following up with you all and hoping to relate to you that I have some really good news in terms of some funding programs that might be a nice anchor that we could tie a lot of these things to.
Great, thanks, Mike. Russ Qualls, did you have anything you wanted to add? Last thoughts?
Well, I'll just add, in terms of the snow type of remote sensing work that I do, I know in previous meetings I've talked briefly, like with you, Mike, and with Chris Daly from PRISM in Oregon, and I haven't really followed up on those things, so I'll try to follow up following this meeting to strike up a conversation with you, Mike, about
Definitely
how we might be able to kind of collaborate on something.
Yeah, because there's lots of room and want to do that as well. So good deal. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. Jema, any last thoughts that you wanted to share?
Not really. I think I've said quite a bit. I love this group, and these meetings are great to, collaborate. It's kind of sad for me that we're not in person and we're not having a bigger, discussion. I miss those, dinner time discussions and just, being in person. But I think this group's very important, and it does a lot of good, and it has brought out tangible things, but maybe we just need to be better about clarifying it, just the collaborative, nature that we now have with Agromet, like that came out of this meeting. So it's not like we don't have anything, just the relationships that it builds and stuff like that. But I think maybe making that a little more evident to people looking out from the outside looking in. So
Perfect. Thanks, Jema. Hopefully we can meet in person next year. That would be delightful. I would love that.
It would be fun. It'd be better to meet in person. I just want to make sure I mention that. No,
yeah.
Thanks.
Noted. I agree. Katie Steele, is there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I've enjoyed listening to the conversation. Like Jama, I miss the in-person, and we have some really great Mexican restaurants here that have survived the pandemic. So, there's an option in the future. But yeah, I have learned a lot during the discussion. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Katie, and I did as well. Thank you. Thank you all for the work you do. It's really always interesting to hear about what's happening, and I know that you're incredibly busy, and I just appreciate you. We have the notes. We'll have the notes ready to go. We'll send them out along with what everyone put in the chat box in terms of potential collaborative work. And I'll organize those by themes because there are about 4 themes around collaboration that came out of this conversation. So I know it was just 2 hours and it was virtual, but thank you for your thoughts and your ideas. And we'll be in touch. We'll be in touch. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Emily.
See you.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
all.
Guys, see you soon.
Bye.